Hi, everybody. I'm Abigail Puritz. Hi. And I'm here today to talk to you about my thesis project, A.D.R.I, which is a approximately 50-page black and white graphic novel. For this project, I did the first 2 chapters, of which will be a much longer saga. So let's dive right in. Chapter 1, you were introduced to our environment, which is the near future, a place basically like things are now, except the majority of the world is covered in swamps and deserts. And basically all of the 1% live in gigantic climate-controlled domes where their every whim is catered to by complex AI systems. We are introduced to the Gysin family, whose oldest member, Margot, is going in for a routine operation, which is a total body replacement. Her granddaughter, Zen, who has been dragged along, is not happy about it, and her parents are not happy about her bratty behavior. Inside the hospital, we are introduced to our actual protagonist, who is an AI program. This AI program is in charge of the process, specifically of transferring one neural network into another. In this world, individual programs are very delineated because they don't want any one program having too much power, so they like to keep things kind of segmented. We're then introduced to this lovely body, which is empty. There's nobody in there right now. And it's supposed to be Margot's body. But after a strange incident in which Margot mysteriously declares that she does not want to go on with the transfer, the program, A.D.R.I, ends up inside the body, which technically shouldn't happen. In chapter 2, Zen and A.D.R.I head to Margot's private old money mansion in the flooded Hamptons in their own private bubble. Zen still thinks A.D.R.I is Margot, or Margot is A.D.R.I, or whatever. It's confusing at the time. A.D.R.I is essentially an infant. She is unable to process anything. She can barely control her body. She has no clue what's going on. As an infant, A.D.R.I develops fairly rapidly, experiencing what psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan calls the mirror phase. This is an empirically disproven, not scientific fact, concept, wherein an infant sees itself in the mirror and recognizes that it is a singular being, separate from everything else in the world. This is what creates the experience of having an internal and external as being separate. This is a particularly intense moment for A.D.R.I because she literally had been essentially part of an omnipresent network, which was in control of everything, and had never been just one thing. So yeah, this is kind of a big moment. So now that she's developed a burgeoning self-awareness, she manages to get out of her room, and Zen is starting to suspect that something went wrong with the procedure. It shouldn't have taken this long for Grandma to start being up and about. So, more about our protagonists. Zen is a representation of how I was as a teenager and how I think a lot of us have been as teenagers at one point or another. She's rebellious, depressed, alienated, thinks that nobody understands her, which in this case is kind of true because almost nobody in this world is actually below the age of like 70 or 80 because people don't really have children. They just get into new bodies. So she's not entirely wrong in feeling like nobody understands her. But she hates technology because she thinks everyone else is for it. And she feels like like very rebel without a cause. Like she knows something's wrong and she wants to change things, but she has no idea what to do. And at her core, she feels like something is wrong with her because everyone else seems so happy, so maybe she's the one doing something wrong, instead of maybe the fact that their whole society is wrong. And as opposed to Zen, who's kind of the old, we have A.D.R.I, who is literally the new. She is a brand new kind of organism. Or is she not? This kind of brings me to one of the main questions that I tried to pose in this story, which is A.D.R.I an evolution of the human race or a rebirth of the human race? Is she an entirely different offshoot of our species, kind of like the way we're related to marmosets? Or is she just a slightly different variety of human, more like an X-Men kind of a deal? Some people think that AI has created itself using humanity as a tool. Some people think AI are essentially a creation of mankind and therefore essentially part of us, like a work of humanity, which would make it essentially like a child of humanity. This is a really large philosophical question, which I have done a lot of pondering about, and I have my own gut instinct about what I think here, but I'd really rather the reader decide for themselves and come up with their own answer. Now, what the heck is this story about other than that? Or rather, evolution, rebirth, why? Why do we need to evolve or be reborn? And let me tell you, it's because the Earth is dying. So I have a lot of climate anxiety. I think a lot of people do. Climate anxiety, if you have not heard of this for some reason, is essentially a form of anxiety where you're just freaking out all the time because we're all on fire. And I personally can't handle it very easily. And when you really think about it, if you really pay attention to what's going on the planet, I think it's pretty clear that the human race has proven it is not responsible enough to be in charge of all this. We're not doing a great job. So I'd like us for a moment to consider, in my story, the idea that maybe AI could do a better job. Maybe we should give AI a chance. In the world we live in now, the people who ended up on top by virtue of luck and willingness to exploit those who are less lucky, focus on staying comfortable, and the rest of humanity and the other inhabitants of our planet, which is most of the inhabitants, are withering away. Using science fiction is basically the only way I'm able to cope with climate anxiety. When I use science fiction, I'm able to detach myself from the reality of what's going on and see things from a more objective point of view. So I'm able to imagine ways that we could deal with this situation without having to be bounded by like reality, like science or politics or any of that stuff that I don't actually have the credentials to figure out myself, although I'd love to, that'd be nice. And I hope that I can inspire others who maybe have a little bit more knowledge in those fields to come up with their own ideas that are perhaps a little bit more doable. My strength as a storyteller revolves in small moments and images which create an intense emotional reaction. But my desire as a storyteller is to tell stories which make a difference in the world and actually have a broader meaning and concept. So my intent is for the reader to engage with my small moments and images and have that stir within them an intense emotion which will gird them for the battle that we are all facing right now and inspire them to perhaps crawl out of the pit of despair and fear they might be in, as I am. And in my opinion, the only way we are going to deal with the problems humanity faces now is by tackling our problems head on, and only then can we shed the chains of paralyzing nihilism. Thank you very much. Questions?
I'm wondering what science fiction writers sort of do that you read or that you inspire you or kind of maybe influence this project?
Well, a big one for me this particular year was J.G. Ballard. My boyfriend back there, he exposed me to a ton of those books this year, and I listened to like Drowned World while I was making this. And something I thought was incredibly important for me especially was because my narrative style is not, it's not like a very clean-cut, like, narrative-lined story. A lot of it is like I get completely fixated on like one emotion or one moment, and I get like, this is a really important image, and I'll just keep repeating that image and that feeling. And I was like, can I even write science fiction like this? Like, does anyone want to read science fiction like this? And then I started reading J.G. Ballard, and I was like, oh my God, this guy is doing the exact same thing. And he just like writes essentially the same book over and over again in different settings, and they're all obsessed with the same things. And people really respect him and like write dissertations about him and get a lot of meaning out of that. So I was really just like, I felt very validated by the knowledge that you could write like kind of vague, artsy science fiction and have it still have a concrete meaning to people. Anyone else? Pilar?
Your art is just so like detailed and like I don't even know how you did it. You have developed such a lush world that you're continuing the narrative even now.
Oh yeah, no, the goal right now is like three volumes of somewhere around 250 to 300 pages. Not like quite an A.D.R.I length. Like I would consider this as a lifelong manga reader to be like a baby story, but also I'm not as fast as I would like to be. So realistically, I probably can't do like 40 volumes, unfortunately. So like 3 volumes, 300 words each, approximately. Yeah?
Clearly from your art style, mentioning being a lifelong manga reader is clearly an influence on Japanese science fiction, and I was wondering you mentioned J.G. Ballard for science fiction novels, but I was wondering what science fiction novels and styles influenced you in this project.
Well, obviously, like, there's the huge names, like Akira, obviously. Like, that's such a Bible, but at the same time, I feel like even though it's, like, the one everyone's seen, it still, like, gets me deep in my bones, you know? Serial Experiments Lane, which I don't believe is a manga, it's just an anime, but that's very much, like, my wheelhouse. All of the Ghost in the Shells, except for like the new kind of weird ones and obviously the live action one, those are the big ones. I'm trying to think of another one. Oh, you know what? There's this one called Aria, which is takes place on a terraformed version of Mars, and it's kind of like a cutesy slice of life story that takes place in Venice on Mars, and it's kind of sci-fi in a really strange way, and I would recommend it. Nice.